Imagine this. You are 10 years old, sitting in a classroom in the Bronx. 1949, the radiator is clanking, the paint on the walls is peeling, and the teacher at the front of the room is reading out names for attendance. One by one, last name after last name. And every single time she gets to yours, the whole room erupts. Lifshitz. That is your last name. And the kids do not care that it is a perfectly normal Eastern European surname that thousands of families carried across the Atlantic with dignity. They only hear the joke, and the joke never gets old to them. Every single day. Your father, Frank, is a house painter from Belarus who came to America with nothing but the clothes on his back and the belief that this country owed his children a better hand than the one he was dealt. Your mother, Frida, stretches every dollar like it is elastic. You can make a pot of soup last 3 days and still convince 4 boys they ate like kings. You share a tiny apartment with 3 brothers in a neighborhood where the fire escapes rattle in the wind and the hallways smell like boiled cabbage and bleach. There is no trust fund, no connections, no invitation to anything. Nobody is coming to rescue you. But here is what nobody in that classroom understands. While they are laughing at your name, you are studying something else entirely. You are studying the movies. Cary Grant in a suit that looks like it was poured onto his body by angels. Fred Astaire, dancing like gravity itself, had signed a permission slip and stepped aside. You sit in those dark Bronx cinemas on Saturday afternoons with sticky floors and torn velvet seats, and you do not just watch the story. You study the world behind the story, the leather chairs, the country houses, crystal glasses catching candlelight, the way rich people move through rooms like they own the air inside them. Something clicks inside you, like the shutter of a camera. A thought forms that will not leave for the next 70 years. It sits in your chest like a small fire that refuses to go out. If that world does not invite me in, I will build it myself. That boy's name was Ralph Lifshitz, and he had exactly 86,400 seconds in every day to prove that the postcode you are born into does not own the story you get to write. By the time he was 16, he made a decision that would follow him forever. He changed his last name to Lauren. His older brother Jerry did the same. Some people call that selling out. Turning your back on your roots, he called it survival. He called it strategy. Because in his neighborhood, your name was either your shield or your target. And Rolf was done being a target. He was ready to become the architect. He did not have money for fashion school. He did not have a portfolio or a fancy degree. He served in the United States Army for 2 years, came back to the Bronx, and looked around at all the doors that were still closed. But what he had, what no school could teach, and no amount of money could buy, was a pair of eyes that saw styled the way a composer hears melody. Everywhere, all at once, without needing anyone's permission. This is 86,400 stories, and this is episode 18, The Architect of Dreams. After high school, Rolf did not walk into a design studio. Nobody was waiting for him with open arms. He took a job selling gloves at a company called Brooks Brothers. Then he moved to ties at a small manufacturer called Rivets and Sons. He learned the fabric, learned the stitching, learned the weight of silk between his fingers and the way a good knot sits against a collar. He studied what made a man pick up one tie and ignore the one sitting right beside it. But more importantly, he learned what was missing. It was 1967. America had just walked through the door of a cultural revolution. Music was changing. Art was changing. The way people talked and thought and loved was changing. But every tie in every department store in America was still thin, narrow, and boring. like someone had taken the entire personality of menswear, folded it up, and hidden it in a drawer. Ralph thought, what if a tie was white? What if it was bold and unapologetic? What if it was made from rich Italian silk in colors that actually meant something? What if a tie could make a statement before a man even opened his mouth? So he started making them by hand, in small batches, from the finest fabrics he could find, wide, colorful, luxurious, and completely against everything the fashion industry said was acceptable. Now here is where the friction enters the story. He walked into Bloomingdale's, one of the biggest, most prestigious department stores in New York City. He laid his ties on the buyer's desk. The buyer picked them up, felt the silk, looked at the width, and said something that would have broken most people. We will take them, but only if you make them thinner. And take your name off the label. Think about that for a second. You are 27 years old. You have almost no money. You have a young wife and a dream that keeps you awake at 3 in the morning. The biggest store in America is offering you a deal that could change your entire financial future overnight. All you have to do is shrink the tie down, erase your name, and become invisible. 99 out of 100 people would have folded, taken the check, told themselves they would put their name on later, once they made it. Most people would have called it a win and popped a bottle. Ralph said no. Not a polite no. Not a, let me think about it and get back to you next week. No. A full, unblinking, I will eat rice for a year before I erase my name no. He called that moment his negative reservoir. The place inside you where every rejection, every insult, every closed door, every you are not good enough gets stored like water behind a dam. Most people let that reservoir drown them. They carry it around like dead weight until it pulls them under. Ralph used it as rocket fuel. Every no became a reason to push harder. And something wild happened. Bloomingdale's came back. They gave him a small section inside the store, a tiny corner. But it was his name, his ties, his wit, his rules, and those wide, bold, unapologetic ties that every expert said were too much. They sold out in weeks. In one single season, Ralph Lauren proved something the fashion industry did not want to hear. The market does not always know what it wants. Sometimes you have to show people a version of themselves they have not imagined yet. And if that vision is real, truly bone deep real, they will follow you anywhere. That was the moment a tie salesman from the Bronx stopped being a salesman and became a brand. In 1968, Ralph Lauren opened his first space. It was not a shop, not a studio, not a boutique on some fancy street in Manhattan. It was a single drawer. One drawer inside a Shard's showroom on the 37th floor of the Empire State Building. That is it. That is where the Polo Empire, one of the most recognized brands in the history of fashion, was born. Inside a drawer, the size of a shoebox. He called the label Polo because the sport represented everything he aspired to. Old world elegance, athleticism, wealth that whispered instead of screamed. A boy from the Bronx naming his brand after a sport played by the richest people on earth. That takes a very specific kind of audacity. But here's the thing about Ralph that separated him from every other designer of his generation. He did not think in clothing. He did not sketch outfits. He thought in worlds. When he designed a shirt, he was not thinking about thread count or collar width. He was thinking about who wears this shirt. Where do they live? What car do they drive? What does the room smell like when they walk through the door? What music is playing in the background? Every single piece was a character in a movie that only played inside his head, and his job was to make you see that movie too. He was building the moat before the business world even had a name for it. A moat is the thing that protects your kingdom, the thing that makes you impossible to copy. Other designers sold clothes. You could knock off their clothes in a factory in 2 weeks. Ralph sold a lifestyle, an entire cinematic universe wrapped in cotton and cashmere and the smell of old leather. You cannot copy a universe. You cannot replicate a feeling. The Polo horse was not just a logo stitched onto a shirt. It was an invitation to a world of old libraries, country estates, mahogany desks, golden retrievers running across green fields at golden hour, and cocktails on a veranda overlooking the ocean. But a kid from the Bronx selling the fantasy of old money New England. And the wildest part, everyone bought it. Not because it was fake, because he made it real. He believed it so deeply that the belief became the product. In 1974, it dressed the entire cast of The Great Gatsby, the Robert Redford film that defined an era of American style. Suddenly, Ralph Lauren was not just a designer, he was Hollywood. By the mid-1980s, Ralph Lauren was untouchable. Flagship stores, major advertising campaigns that looked like they belonged in art galleries, a cultural force that transcended fashion entirely. And then, in 1987, his body tried to end the story. Doctors found a brain tumor, non-cancerous, but sitting in a place inside his skull that could shut everything down in an instant. Surgery was dangerous. The recovery was brutal and uncertain. Most people would have stepped back, sold the business, retired to one of those country estates he had spent 2 decades building his entire brand around. Nobody would have blamed him. He had already won. He could have stopped. Ralph went back to work. Not in 6 months. Not after a long vacation in the Hamptons. He was sketching new collections from his hospital bed, with an IV drip in his arm and bandages wrapped around his head. Because this is what a Goliath slayer does. Goliath is not always a person standing in your way. Sometimes Goliath is your own body turning against you. Sometimes Goliath is a doctor telling you to slow down when every fiber of your soul is screaming to speed up. Sometimes slaying the giant means nothing more dramatic than getting out of bed when every cell inside you is begging you to stay down. Ralph did not just survive. He came back and built harder, faster, and bolder than he ever had before. By the 1990s, Ralph Lauren was no longer a fashion brand. Let me say that again so it lands properly. He was no longer a fashion brand. He was a sovereign nation with its own flag, its own language, its own rules, and its own economy. That is sovereignty. He expanded into home furnishings, bed sheets, towels, paint colors for your walls, furniture for your living room, restaurants where you could eat dinner surrounded by his world. He launched fragrances that sold millions of bottles. He created an entire home collection that let people live inside the dream 24 hours a day. He did not ask for permission from the fashion world. He did not wait for approval from the old guard in Paris or Milan. He left the fashion conversation behind entirely. While European fashion houses were fighting over hemlines, runway shows, and who got the front row seat at Fashion Week, Ralph was building a complete world that did not need their validation. A world where you could wake up in Ralph Lauren sheets, pour your morning coffee in a Ralph Lauren mug, walk through a house painted in Ralph Lauren colors, drive past a Ralph Lauren restaurant, and walk into a Ralph Lauren store wearing Ralph Lauren from head to toe. And none of it would feel like a costume. It would feel like identity. That is not fashion. That is architecture. That is world building on a scale that nobody in the industry had ever attempted. He won what I call the aviation war of fashion. See, most brands fight on the ground. They compete for shelf space in department stores, for magazine covers, for influencer partnerships, for the latest trend cycle. Rolf went 30,000 feet above all of it. He stopped competing with other brands because he stopped being a brand entirely. He became a world, a universe, a way of living. And you cannot compete with the world. You can only try to build your own, and nobody has. By the year 2000, Ralph Lauren Corporation operated over 400 stores worldwide. 400. Let that number sit with you for a moment. From the Bronx to Beverly Hills. From a single drawer in the Empire State Building to flagship cathedrals on Fifth Avenue, Regent Street in London, the Champs-Élysées in Paris, Ginza in Tokyo. In 1997, the company went public on the New York Stock Exchange. Ralph Lauren, the kid who could not afford fashion school, the kid who sold gloves and got laughed at for his last name, rang the opening bell on Wall Street. Let that sink in for a second. A boy who was bullied every single day in a Bronx classroom now had his name on a building, on a brand, on a global empire, and on a stock ticker, watched by investors around the planet. And here is the detail that always gets me, the one that separates the real ones from the pretenders. He never moved the company out of New York. He could have gone to Paris, Milan, anywhere in the world. Every advisor probably told him to, but he stayed in the city that made him. Because loyalty was not just a marketing strategy. It was part of the brand, part of the man. The Bronx did not define Ralph Lauren, but it made him. And he never once pretended otherwise. So now it is your turn. And I need to ask you something uncomfortable. Something you might not want to hear right now. But I'm going to say it anyway, because that is what this channel is for. What is your excuse? Ralph Lauren did not have money. He did not have education. He did not have connections or a mentor or a wealthy uncle who could open doors for him. He did not even have a name that people could say without laughing in his face. But he had a vision so clear it scared him awake at night. And he had the guts, the raw, terrifying, irrational guts to say no when the entire world was telling him to shrink himself down, take what he could get, and be grateful. The friction you are feeling right now, and I know you are feeling it because you would not still be watching this if you were not. The doubt, the rejection, the people telling you it will never work, the voice in your own head whispering that maybe they are right. That is not a wall. That is a door. Every founder I have ever studied on this channel started with a version of that door. The only difference, the only one that matters, is that they walked through it while everyone else stood outside arguing about whether it was even there. Rolf proved something that nobody in the fashion industry wanted to admit. You do not need to be born into beauty to create it. You do not need to be invited to the table to build your own. You do not need a degree, a postcode, a trust fund, or permission from anyone to turn your vision into an empire. He went from a kid watching Cary Grant movies in a dark cinema with sticky floors to dressing the entire world in his imagination. From a drawer in the Empire State Building to 400 stores in the most expensive streets on the planet. And he did it, all of it, inside the same 86,400 seconds you and I are given every single day. He did not get extra time. He did not get a cheat code. He used the same hours you're burning through right now, scrolling, hesitating, waiting for the perfect moment. There is no perfect moment. There is only the moment you decide to stop waiting.